Thank you so much, Mahnaz, for this very, very kind introduction. And good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many people coming out for poetry at the end of a long week. And it's a particular honor for me to be here at CSW61 because, in fact, in the UN system, there is no official provision for the Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights to report to the CSW. And the only reason that I'm able to be here is due to the generosity and the vision of the Women's Learning Partnership. And I am very, very grateful to them for that. And I'm especially thrilled to have an opportunity to take part with these brilliant women poets, because I really think that culture is a critical tool for defending cultural rights. And I'm going to try not to talk too long and let us get to the poetry as quickly as possible. But I have been asked this morning to say a few words about the relationship between human rights and culture and the significance of art in bringing about change. And I'm going to do this in particular through the lens of my recent report to the UN Human Rights Council about fundamentalism, extremism, and cultural rights. And in fact, my student Joss, who's here, has some copies of the report in the front if anybody is interested. So I thought maybe I should start by saying something about the cultural rights mandate, because it may be one that you are less familiar with than, say, the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. This is a position that was created back in 2009 with support from Cuba in particular and from civil society around the world. And the first mandate holder was the Pakistani feminist sociologist Farida Shahid. And I'm very lucky, I have to say, to be following in her very distinguished footsteps. Now, in her first report, she said that cultures are constantly evolving, which I think is an incredibly important idea, and I've tried to carry that idea forward. They're dynamic. They're subjected to many influences and internal debates and internal contestation. They change over time. And I think writers and poets have long played a vital role in precisely that process of contestation that she was alluding to. In her report on the cultural rights of women, she argued that we need to shift the paradigm from viewing culture solely as an obstacle to women's human rights, though sometimes it has been misused in that way, but moving beyond that view to really calling for women's equal cultural rights, including their equal rights to freedom of artistic expression. And I think that is precisely really what the Women's Learning Partnership is doing, claiming women's equal right to make culture, to shape culture, to make choices about culture. And I really salute the WLP for this important effort. Let me tell you a little bit about the legal mandate, for the legal basis for the mandate, because it's very relevant to the poetry that we're about to hear. So it is grounded first in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Article 27, which clearly states that everyone, and really think of that, everyone, has the right freely to participate in cultural life. It is also grounded in Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Sadly, this is a standard the United States, amongst a small other group of countries, has not ratified. But that article, which applies in many other countries around the world that are states parties to the covenant, guarantees also the right to take part in cultural life, specifically without discrimination of any kind. And it also underscores the need to respect the freedom indispensable for both scientific research and creative activity. Now, my report to this year's Human Rights Council, which was delivered just a few weeks ago on March 3rd, is about a topic which really sort of affects every single aspect of these international standards I've just mentioned, namely the impact of diverse forms of fundamentalism and extremism on cultural rights. And I have to really underscore this point that I did try to look very globally at all the forms of fundamentalism and extremism that we're seeing in all regions of the world. And just on a personal note, I would say I am half Algerian and half American, and I have seen now the experience of watching each of my parents' countries deal with the rise of extremism and the terrible grief that each of my parents in turn has had to experience, like so many other parents and families around the world. And so my gaze at this problem has really tried to be multi-directional. I think that that is absolutely critical. These kinds of ideologies and the movements that espouse them, and I try to define that in the report, whether they take the form of state or non-state actors, represent major threats to human rights today, including cultural rights, including the right to freedom of artistic expression. And the report tries to map as much of this as possible. It's very interesting to see, given the diversity of fundamentalists and extremists that we're seeing across all of the world's major religious traditions, and also political forms of extremism, including far-right extremism, including in the West. There's all this diversity, and at the same time, there are certain kinds of unity. That is to say, there are common themes across fundamentalist and extremist abuses of cultural rights. These are themes which have an immense impact on women and on the right to freedom of artistic expression. These abuses often involve attempts at cultural engineering aimed at redesigning culture based on monolithic worldviews, focused on so-called purity or enmity towards those who are deemed the other, policing what is called honor and modesty, claiming cultural and moral superiority, and we've heard a lot of that lately, imposing a claimed true religion or authentic singular culture. And in fact, when I say the word culture, please always think the S in your head. Cultures. I said this in my first report. That's what I actually mean. It's interesting, in Bolivia, for example, they have a Ministry of Cultures. And think what a different concept that is than a Ministry of Culture, which is monolithic. So all of these attempts, really, to curtail cultural rights by fundamentalists and extremists also aim to limit the enjoyment of women's human rights across the board, from their rights to access public space, to their sexual and reproductive rights, to their right to freedom of expression. Fundamentalists and extremists also often seek to quash the expression of any cultural opposition to their own agenda, including that comes in the form of poetry. And I want to skip ahead here. And let me talk specifically about the impact on the right to freedom of artistic expression. And my predecessor also did a specific report on freedom of expression, artistic expression, back in 2013 that might be of interest to you. And artistic expression really poses an inherent challenge to fundamentalists and extremists of all kinds, because it offers the ultimate manifestation of the temporal and the heterodox. It embodies freedom of thought. Art in all its forms suggests that human beings may also be creators, and that is a very radical concept. As a result, in many contexts, artists have faced profound risks for the content of their work, or simply for producing art, whatever its content, but they have continued nonetheless. So basically the point I'm trying to make is that the wonderful poetry we're about to hear is something we should never take for granted, something that in many contexts, and perhaps increasingly here as well, is in need of defense. Now, the history and practice of women's artistic expression is often erased by diverse fundamentalists, and sometimes entire artistic practices, such as music, are banned. And all of this, taken together, the restrictions to and the violations of artistic freedom, create an unsafe environment for all engaged in the arts, for their audiences as well, and undermine efforts to counter all forms of extremism and fundamentalism. And just to give you one specific example of these kinds of restrictions, in the report I talk about, and I think about this person here this morning very much, the Palestinian poet Ashraf Fayed, who was sentenced to death in 2015 by a Saudi Arabian court for accusations including apostasy and promoting atheism based on his poetry, amongst other things. His sentence was later reduced to 8 years in prison, which he is now serving, and 800 lashes, and we're hoping very much that those will not be meted out to him, and that sentence is being appealed. But it's actually being appealed in both directions. It could be cut down, it could indeed get worse. And I wanted to, again this morning, in the presence of these distinguished poets, call for the immediate release of Ashraf Fayed, and ask any of you who tweet, please to tweet, free Ashraf Fayed this morning, because we have to stand in solidarity with poets like him. They really raise the most defiant questions, and I was looking at some of his poetry this morning. He asked this wonderful question in one of his poems: since when does the wind honor traffic laws? Since when? And that, I think, is a very interesting question to ponder in our times. He also wrote a beautiful poem, very apropos for the CSW, entitled Equal Opportunities. And he wrote, a son and a daughter, The mother prefers the son to the daughter. The son will stand by his mother through the vicissitudes of life. The daughter will produce another son to stand by her side. And so it is for verses like these and others that he is today in jail. Now, this is just one case. I have been informed of many other cases in many other regions around the world where artistic freedom has been curtailed in the name of fundamentalist interpretations of religion by both state and non-state actors. And I won't go into detail here, but you can read about them in the report. This includes in Russia, this includes in North America, this includes in the West Aceh province of Indonesia, and this includes in India, where those who challenge orthodoxy or fundamentalism have become increasingly vulnerable, where fundamentalist groups, fundamentalist Hindu groups in this case, have offered to cut off the tongues of writers who insult Hinduism, and where rationalist writers have been assassinated with impunity in recent years. And it's impossible, in fact, to list all of the diverse cases where, in recent times, unfortunately, people have, in fact, been assassinated and killed for their artistic expression, but you will see some of those in the report. And also, they have been killed in some cases for their defense of the arts. And I think of, and I desperately want us to remember her, I think of Intisar el-Hasiri, a Libyan civil rights activist and leading member of Tanwir, a group dedicated to education, music, and the arts, who was found killed in February of 2015, murdered likely by Islamist militiamen. And we can't forget these brave people around the world who were seeking to promote the arts and paid really the ultimate price for that. But the amazing thing, and this is the note that I really want to end on, is that despite the threats, artists have continued to play key roles around the world, challenging diverse fundamentalists and extremists. So, for example, in response to the pattern in India that I just described, at least 40 of the leading Indian writers from many different ethnic and linguistic backgrounds bravely returned their literary awards in protest. And this really made international news, and kudos to them. Or one can think about examples perhaps closer to where we are at the moment, like the cast of Hamilton, the Broadway musical, bravely and respectfully challenging Vice President Pence shortly after the election. Or indeed the cast of Saturday Night Live and the wonderful Melissa McCarthy, who every week give a comedic challenge to the current administration. And I encourage anybody maybe visiting from abroad to look on YouTube for some of these videos. And it was amazing after the comedienne Melissa McCarthy first portrayed Sean Spicer, the spokesperson at the White House, that it was deemed by some commentators on the right that it was insulting that a woman had portrayed him. But I think she does such a beautiful job. Or one can think about the recent open letter made jointly by the directors of all the nominated films for an Oscar for Best Foreign Film, and they collectively, from many countries, lamented that fear-based nationalism had imperiled the chance to be enriched by something seemingly foreign, and the belief that human encounters can change us for the better. Now, art, education, science, and culture are also among the best ways to fight fundamentalism and extremism. They are not luxuries, but they are critical to creating alternatives, making space for peaceful contestation, and promoting inclusion. And I am deeply worried about what the impact may be of the proposed new U.S. budget, which is making cuts in all of these areas, including to the National Endowment for the Arts, public television, and education, at a time when we have never needed these things more. But really, despite this bleak picture, and I really will end on this note, it is not a moment for despair, but for hope, based on concrete action. And I see that hope in those who continue practicing arts, in those cultural rights defenders and ordinary people around the world, challenging fundamentalism and extremism, continuing artistic practice, sometimes at the risk of their lives. And I think about what happened recently in Pakistan on the 16th of February, after a Daesh suicide bombing that killed 85 people at a Sufi shrine. And the dancer Shima Kermani went to the site to perform a dance for the local people, a traditional dance, notwithstanding the security risks. And she said the purpose of the performing arts is to uplift humanity, to make us better human beings, to create an atmosphere of harmony and togetherness. Along with the sorrow for those who were killed, one has the hope that life will go on with beauty, and love. This was my message and my dance. And I think we collectively need to show the same courage as women like Shima Kermani and women artists all over the world and stand together against the global avalanche of hate and for cultural rights for all. And thank you so much for coming, and I really look forward to hearing the poets.